To start at the beginning, why did you come to China? How did it happen?
Well, when I was a kid, I lived on Tyneside, and at that time in the 30s, then perhaps it would be easier to say that I lived next, my hometown was next to Jarrow. That is the town that was murdered. Ellen Wilkinson wrote a book about it. That means there was a tremendous amount of poverty and unemployment at that time. So that at that time, when I was a youngster, then I started to, as you might say, resent the life of an ordinary worker and how you had to live when I was a youngster.
In Britain?
That was in Britain, you see. Then there was the Second World War, and then I wanted to fight fascism. So by the time, at the end of the Second World War, well, as you might say, I read by that time. Now, during the Second World War, my uncle had lent me a book, Red Star Over China by Edgar Snow. And by reading about this new life in China, then I was attracted to it very, very much. So when my ship came to Hong Kong, then I tried to get in touch with people who would help me to come here to China and live and try and experience this kind of life I'd read about in this Red Star Over China.
What finally pushed you into making the move across the border, into moving across from Hong Kong?
Well, when I was in HMS Tamer, then there was the Amethyst incident. You see, that was at the end of April when the Chinese Liberation Army was about to cross over the Yangtze River. Now, at that time, I got into a quarrel with people in my mess in the HMS Tamer, and for that reason, I was classed as a troublemaker, and I was going to be sent to another ship in the Mediterranean. And when I got this transfer, then I decided at that time I had to more or less take my chance, and if I didn't take it then, I would never have another opportunity. So I got in touch with some people I knew, and they helped me to come here to China.
Did you worry at all about deserting?
To me, not at all. It didn't seem to me as much a crime as that. I was looking forward and not looking backwards.
What sort of a life has China given you since then?
Well, it's rather hard for modern people, especially youngsters, to understand. I mean, one might say here, lots of their life in China is very much similar to what you would get in the Durham mining villages or the Welsh mining villages. When my father was a boy, that means you have a very, very communal nature and friendship, which makes a person, he doesn't have as much individualism. He's more or less part of a group where everybody tries to do their best for each other. This is the main thing that's attracted me to Chinese life here.
Did you have difficulty making yourself understood when you first arrived?
Oh, I didn't know any English at all, any Chinese at all. And I picked my Chinese more or less like a small kid. Of course, in that way I wasn't, because I was completely cut off from English, then I picked it up rather easily, rather quickly.
Do you find it difficult to speak English now? Is it a tremendous effort for you?
Well, as you might say, I have to think first and speak afterwards.
But you're fluent in Chinese or Cantonese?
In Cantonese. I speak Cantonese, which is the dialect we all use here in the factories and at home.
Could you describe for me in Cantonese what your job is about?
我現在係嗰啲中石油公司 實際上係夠銷售啊，同佢哋人哋聯繫啊，關於設備啊，有冇困難啊，訂貨其他嘢咁樣。
I gather you have some regrets about moving into the job you have now, which is with the Import-Export Corporation, from the job you had, which was in a sugarcane factory. Why do you have those regrets?
Well, when you've lived with people for about 20 years, got friends of 20 years, and you've got to leave them, then you find it rather difficult to part with them.
And why did you have to move here?
Well, because there's quite a shortage of people who know technical matters and also know English quite well. So I was asked to come here to work in this new job of mine.
As a contribution to China's modernization program?
That's right. But I prefer my old life, to tell you the truth.
What do you regret most about this kind of job? When I rang you up, you were saying that you didn't particularly want to talk to Westerners at first. Why do you feel that way?
Well, to tell the truth, since I came here, I've been rather, as you might say, famous. I would rather say notorious. Everybody's always calling me up.
Sorry, come in. When I rang you up at first, you didn't want to see us at first.
I see.
Can you tell me why you have this reluctance to meet Westerners?
Well, since I came here, lots of people have been coming and thinking that they like to see and asking me about my life here. Some even businessmen think that I could help them to more or less cut through red tape, whereas they don't understand that I'm only an ordinary, as you might say, sail engineer and interpreter. For that reason, I don't have very much influence. For that reason, sometimes I find it rather embarrassing when I can't help these people.
And you've had a lot of reporters after you,
right.
as it were.
Quite a lot.
What's your feeling about that?
Well, I find it very embarrassing because I don't think I've done anything, especially, as you might say, anything special. And I find it rather, more or less, I'm rather surprised and embarrassed because people think there's something quite different. There's something quite outstanding or something different about me, whereas I'm not. I'm just like an ordinary English worker or an ordinary Chinese worker, which, to tell the truth, the difference, very, very little indeed.
You've married here?
Yes.
A Chinese girl?
Yes, a Chinese girl.
And do you find that you've adopted Chinese traditions and the Chinese way of life completely?
Oh, I don't think so. Some of this old feudalism and things like that, I don't go for. I try to, as you might say, have the best of two worlds. The best of Western life and the best of Chinese life.
Do you still have a British passport?
Well, I'm applying for one because perhaps I'll be returning home for the holidays in the near future.
Do you think that Her Majesty's Navy might wish to interview you about that? Are you worried about that?
No, they've given me a protection certificate about it, so that if I return home, I'll not be arrested because I deserted in 1949.
What are your feelings about the prospect of going home and seeing a Britain that is obviously very different to the one you left?
Well, I'm not apprehensive about tying Britain, but I'm apprehensive of people always asking me this and that, and I'll have to be explaining quite a lot of things that sometimes I don't know enough about.
What is the thing that you've missed most in China, which you are most looking forward to seeing in the West, from what you've read about modernization in the West?
My family. See all of the friends and all of my family that I haven't seen. Britain, I think, although some of the houses and things like that are different. I think the main thing in the country isn't the houses, it's the people itself.
Mr. Young, thank you very much indeed.
A Geordie with a Chinese accent is back in Britain for the first time in 34 years. He's David Young, who in the 40s, as a Royal Navy petty officer, jumped ship to go and live in China. Now he's back in England with a Chinese trade mission. He's been pardoned by the Admiralty, so he won't be arrested for desertion.
David Young and his Chinese stepson Jia examine that curious construction, the British parking meter, which both of them were seeing today for the very first time. But for the man who missed the last 34 years, now reunited with his sisters and their families from Tyneside, the changes in Britain were not as great as he'd expected.
The roads are much better than they were, but lots of the houses are very much the same as they used to be. The motorways, I think, are very, very much better. But cars, far too much, I think.
But it's all very strange for his wife, who's never left China before and speaks very little English.
She learned Russian in school, so she's having to have a crash course in English from my sisters and my nieces.
She's being very well looked after by your sister here. Could you ask her how she is enjoying being in Britain?
你話嚟英國啊，你中唔中意啊？
Well, today has brought the answer to a prayer for a Northeast family. For 6 years, they've been hoping that one of the region's most amazing exiles would be able to come back home. And today, David Young touched down in Britain after 33 years in China. His two sisters were in London to greet him, and the rest of his family waited at home for news. Liz Howe now takes up the story.
This was how David Young looked the last time his family saw him in England. In 1949, the young officer deserted his ship, the Amethyst, in Hong Kong, whilst waiting to stand trial for defending a young seaman who'd refused to fight Chinese communists. Whilst his family in heaven thought he was dead, he built up a career in China. Eventually, he wrote home. Then, in the Cultural Revolution, they believed he had perished again. But after 1975, he made contact with his two sisters who visited him, and plans were made for him to come to England. Interviewed in China, he was asked what he missed most and most wanted to see in England.
My family. See all of the friends and all of my family that I haven't seen. Britain, I think, although some of the houses and things like that are different, I think the main thing in the country isn't the houses, it's the people itself.
Today, David's dream came true. He brought his stepson and Cantonese wife to Britain as part of a Chinese trade delegation, and he won't be arrested for his old offence. He'll return to China after the trip. Meanwhile, what does he notice about Britain 1982?
It would seem that it's rather more orderly than it used to be, but rather faster. As you might say, the tempo of life. When I was a kid, there was quite a lot more bicycles. Now I see very, very few of them here nowadays.
Do you notice any difference in the people and the way they dress, the way they behave?
Oh, well, I wouldn't say. It's quite a hot day here, and it would seem that they dress very much similar to what I see in Canton and especially in Hong Kong. Perhaps they are a bit quieter than they are in Hong Kong.
Your wife has come over with you, and does she speak much English?
No, she learned Russian in school, so she's having to have a crash course in English from my sisters and my nieces.
She's being very well looked after by your sister here. Could you ask her how she is enjoying being in Britain?
你話嚟英國啊，你中唔中意啊？
唔中意。
What did he say?
He said he doesn't like it.
He doesn't like it. He'd prefer to be in China.
I don't believe him. If he's in China, he's got to go to school. Yeah, he is. Doesn't need to go to school.
Can I ask your sisters how you're looking forward to him being home? What's your reaction to him coming home?
Fantastic.
We're just longing to get them home.
We just want him home. We want him to see the places he used to see, meet people he hasn't met for a long time. Oh, I think it's wonderful.
Good evening. I hope that glimpse of our reports for this, the opening night of First Tuesday, gives you some idea of the kind of films we're going to present in this new regular programme. On the first Tuesday of the month, every month, I'll be introducing some of the very best documentaries about Britain and the rest of the world, along with Jane Wormsley.
You'll see films made by members of Yorkshire Television's well-known documentary team. And besides the homegrown product, we'll be tracking down the most interesting work by foreign filmmakers, whether they're made on a shoestring miles from nowhere or the best of the major European and American networks.
But now to the first of First Tuesday's reports, which comes from the most populous country on earth, a country which is only gradually opening its doors to Western scrutiny, the People's Republic of China. Tonight's film, called The Chinese Geordie, breaks new ground with the story of an Englishman called David Young from County Durham, who 34 years ago jumped ship to begin a new life in what's now his home, China.
Rush hour in Canton, southern China. 1,000 million people live in China. That's 1 out of every 4 men and women on this earth. In Canton, one man stands out. David Young is 56 years old, born and brought up on Tyneside. In 1949, he deserted from the British Navy while stationed in Hong Kong and joined the Chinese Revolutionary Army, and he's been here ever since. Amongst the small band of Britons living in China, he's unique. Not for him the privilege of life in a university or an embassy. For 34 years, he's lived as an ordinary Chinese worker. For the past 2 years, he's worked for the state as an interpreter.
我哋可以叫佢哋租一個啦，從專門係70到125。 可能大啲130啊，做一個達殊夫架。專門做一個大啲㗎。做special accessory 70 to 130 millimeters。一元啊，5毫幾嘛嚇？5毫幾啊？
喂喂，屌你反你問落嚟。From miles around, local peasants bring their produce to markets in Canton. It's a fertile, relatively prosperous region. David's wages of £38 a month buy all the basics, but a chicken is a luxury. Staple goods like meat and even rice are rationed. But David first learned about hardship in Britain, was on Tyneside as a boy during the hunger and unemployment of the 1930s that David Young's political views were forged. At 17, he joined the Navy. 6 years later, he was posted to Hong Kong, where his interest in Chinese communism blossomed. Then in 1949, rather than be sent home when the Navy grew anxious about his left-wing political leanings, David jumped ship and smuggled himself in a small boat across the Chinese border to join the communists. Was jumping ship an easy decision?
When you're 23 years old and you've got more or less high ideals, it's not very difficult. At that age, you do things first and then think. I've never had any regrets. I mean, in some way, I've always thought of myself as more or less being a bit of an, as you might say, ambassador for British people. You might say a one-man peace corps, so that I've always thought of myself whereby by ordinary Chinese people getting to know an ordinary English person, then perhaps they would understand that not all of English people are the same as what they read in books as big fat imperialists, and that in Britain then you've got quite a lot of ordinary people. And somehow I think I've more or less succeeded in that.
But when he first escaped to China, David didn't live in the city. For more than 34 years, he virtually vanished, an Englishman amongst the peasants and workers in the Chinese countryside. In Guangdong province, on the Pearl River, stands the Sitao sugar mill. For many years, David Young worked here as a lowly fitter and turner, living in the commune with his workmates. Until he was 54, he shared this Spartan room in the bachelor dormitory with 2 other workers.
When I was a kid, I only knew the 30s and the Second World War, so that it was, the difference wasn't as much as it would be, because my memories of when I was a kid on Tyneside were very, very Spartan. To tell you the truth, I used to eat very much better here than I did when I was a kid in Britain.
So, what was your worst problem in those early days?
I had a severe dose of malaria when I was in the liberated areas. And it was only when I came here to this factory that I was cured.
How did they manage that?
Well, it might be a bit heretical from a British point of view, but they got me to eat dog meat. It's a very, very rich food. For that reason, after eating it every day for about a couple of months, and I was cured.
You lived here as a bachelor for a long time, into your 50s. Did you find it lonely at all?
No, none at all. Because we worked together in the shop together. Then when we, at night times, often we had meetings, and then we discussed things together. So I felt more or less like as though I was amongst a lot of relatives. I didn't feel much like a bachelor at all. I expect that's one of the reasons why I didn't bother to get married.
But did you meet anyone you'd like to have married during this time?
Well, I did once. At that time, when I was in Yangjiang, but unfortunately the girl was she was scared, a bit afraid of marrying a foreigner. So that wasn't successful.
Did it upset you?
Well, there's lots of other Chinese girls in China.
Now David has a baby daughter, Kathy, a wife, Leanne, with a 7-year-old son by her first marriage. Relatives have come to see the new arrival. Every day, David takes his stepson, Gar, to school. Having an English stepfather is a great advantage as Chinese education turns towards the West.
Class begins. Stand up. Good morning, boys and girls.
Good morning, Miss Pam.
Sit down, please. What day is today?
Today is Monday.
tell me, what's on the desk? All class together.
There is a pencil box on the desk.
What's in the pencil box?
There are 2 pencils in the pencil box.
Saturday night out in Canton's Culture Park. For a few pennies, the Chinese worker can enjoy opera and all the fun of the fair. For years, David lost contact with his other family on Tyneside. They thought he was dead. Now he writes home regularly, and his family send him music tapes from England. Last year, David Young, now pardoned for his desertion in 1949, came back to Britain as an interpreter with a trade delegation. His sisters wait anxiously, their long-lost brother's first step on home soil for more than 30 years.
Hey, come on, lovey.
I waited 33 years.
Done Air to Faro, flight number DA4326, now boarding at gate 20. Done Air to Faro, flight number DA4326, boarding now at gate 20. John Tina, recently arrived from Mallorca. John Tina, to airport information, please.
Well, Andrew. Oh, I didn't hello.
And Kenneth.
David. Nice to see you.
This is Gillian. Oh, come on, Judith. And Judith. And Mrs. Susan. And Mark.
Oh, hello.
There's Kenneth dear. Where's Arthur? Go and bring it. Come on. Come on. Come on.
No.
Oh, bless him. Oh, it's lovely to see you.
No. I...
Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on.
As kids, we used to always be going down to see the new launches, and every couple of days there was a new launching. And now I find out that's just looking around. There's not very much work to do, and it seems quite a pity. because the Tyneside shipyards can make bloody good fine ships. 跟你一個座，座。喂，睇跑馬得唔得？好難啊喎，連賺一個就難啊喎，得兩個咧。
唉，你都走唔得雞喎！
好唔好玩啊？站站喺呢個，站呢個地方。啊，係。嚟嚟嚟。 我這個頭，喂，
食呢啲嘛？
Isabel's at school today, of course. That's
一定用。
David, I have a present for you.
哦。
他送禮物給他。
Do you recognise it? Turn the page
This is
this way.
Marsden Rock.
That's right.
So go on to my sitting room. 太太啊，夏天好啲人係去嗰邊啊，又識時間我游水咯，叫 Marsden Rock.
Marsden Rock.
In South Shields.
Marsden Rock.
Marsden Rock.
That's very nice.
And when I look at it in China, then I'll
You'll be at
remember
South
it.
Shields, you'll be at Marsden Beach.
To see all my old friends, my family, come back to the places I knew when I was a kid, to find out they haven't changed as much as all that. Changed for the better. But still are very, very much the same, more or less like Marsden Rock. To see that again.
It's a warm welcome at the sugar mill as David slips back into life as an ordinary Chinese worker once again.
冇，我啱翻嚟嘛，咁咪要出嚟影啊，係嘛？啱翻嚟啊嘛。賓館住咗未㗎？未喺度賓館啊。
呢家就唔得，咁啊就要再擺呢個喺呢度嚇。
For his friend Ah Hing, David's return heralds the arrival of modern Western technology.
嗱，你炸你係就嗰度罐頭咁樣啊嘛，牽住佢，之後咁咪慢慢轉咯，咁咪轉就向嗰邊。佢意思係在昆明嗰邊就唔識講啊。呢次係話。
Ah Chun's family have known David since he arrived at the sugar mill in 1949. They welcome him back with a special meal.
好難㗎。
唔係好冷。
David, does Ah Chung regard you as British or as Chinese?
咁你認為話英國人係番鬼佬啊，或者中國人啊？
我哋都冇當佢係番鬼佬，當我哋兄弟一樣嘅，當佢哋自己人一樣，所以佢嚟到好隨便。
He said he doesn't regard me from a nationality point of view, more as like a brother, more as like a relative of hers.
即係覺得佢哋喺我哋本廠工作咧係負責任，個性比較急，比較暴躁。所以好多時咧，我都好似同佢咧，即係提好多意見咧，即係比較工作比較暴躁一啲，對人係比較暴躁啲。
He said that she thinks I'm rather responsible in my work. Unfortunately, I have a hasty temper. And sometimes, often, she has to criticize me because sometimes I tread on people's toes. A factory here in China is not only a production unit, it is also a social unit. So that to try and isolate it from ordinary life in China itself is quite wrong. The sense of a community here is very much like you had in the Durham villages, in the Welsh pit villages. For that reason, you get a very close sense of community with people.
The Chinese commune looks after its citizens from the cradle to the grave. As China modernizes, workers have grown more prosperous, and many peasants in Guangdong now have television sets. But for David, life wasn't always so comfortable.
I took part in the Cultural Revolution, and towards the end of it, I was suspected as being a spy, and I was in prison for more than 10 months until it was all cleared up.
How did it actually happen? Did men come to your house one night, or how were you actually arrested?
Yeah, that's right. Well, it was happening all the time at that time. It was called the clean-up of the proletarian class.
And you were arrested as part of the clean-up?
And that's right.
Yes. What was it like in prison for you?
Well, Chinese prisons are not as good as all that.
Above everything is the Chinese Communist Party. This is Chinese industrial relations. The annual Workers' Representative Congress agrees production and profit levels. It heralds the beginning of the sugar harvest. These little red flowers celebrate the harvest, singing that the warmth of the Communist Party is like the sun, making them grow.
I do hope that one day at home we'll have a society very much like this one is here. I mean, Jerusalem, that's what we say. When the words in the song Jerusalem say that build Jerusalem, in England's green and pleasant land. I really love England, and I only hope that someday the advantages of both societies can be amalgamated. I hope that some of the advantages of Britain we can use here in China, and some of the social advantages we have here in China will be adopted one day in Britain itself.
You still get quite emotional when you hear Jerusalem, for example.
Well, it's true, because it's an English song. It's how do you say, all of British history, her traditions, and her hopes are in that song.
Do you think that you'll stay here?
No doubt I'll stay here. Although I hope I'll have the opportunity to go back home again sometime for another holiday or to do some business.
So you'll die a Chinaman or a Geordie?
Die a Geordie. But then British people are used to going all over the world. You'll find there's not a country in the world that hasn't got a grave that hasn't got an Englishman in it. Well, it's just another Englishman's grave in China.
The Young family may have roots on Tyneside, but its future hopes lie here in China. Four-week-old Kathy Young's first family pilgrimage is to the memorial commemorating the martyrs who gave up their lives to build the Chinese Revolution.